My name is Robert Martellacci of C21 Canada, Canadians for 21st Century Learning and Innovation, and I'm honored to host as a moderator today this wonderful, insightful panel on K12 CIO National Webinar, Adapting to Remote Learning During COVID-19 and what's in store and what's next. It's never been a more challenging time to be in education, and I like to say, and in a crisis, there are opportunities. And with that, I'm honored to have join us as our first CIO Alliance panel, and with the Canadian Coalition for Online Learning organization that we launched. We have Dr. Mario Chesson, the Director of Research and Innovation and Change Management for the District Scolaire Francophone Sud, and Peter Singh, the Executive Officer of IT Services at the Toronto District School Board, Canada's largest school district. And then we have Stephen Whiffen, the Director of Instruction and CIO of School Division 43 in Coquitlam, who hosted us this past year for our EdTech Leadership Summit. And also we have my colleague, Karen Yamada, the Chief Learning Officer and CFO of C21 Canada. Thank you for joining us. Perhaps we can go through and do a little introduction. Mario, why don't you kick it off and tell us a little bit about your district and your role, and then we can move on to Peter and Stephen and kick off the questions.
Yeah, very good. Good afternoon, good morning for someone, good afternoon for much of the others. But yeah, my name is Mario Chesson from District Francophone Sud. It's situated in the southeast of New Brunswick. My role, this is my new role. I used to be on the Anglophone side in New Brunswick. Now I moved on the Francophone side, and my role is Director of Research, Innovation, and Change Management. My basically role is providing opportunities to think differently and do learning differently in our school, supported by research. So it's a great forward thinker district, very under Monique Boudreau's leadership. And we're working closely to definitely have this big movement of entrepreneurial schools. So we want to have student engaged, passionate teachers, great leaders, contribute to the community.
Thank you for that, Mario. Peter Singh of the Toronto District School Board, welcome.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you for the opportunity actually to meet and see and chat with the folks from coast to coast. Appreciate the opportunity, and good morning and good afternoon to everyone across Canada. My role here at TDSB is a mix of both CIO and CTO, and my role as an executive officer, I look after the technology portfolio at the district itself, which includes from everything from ERP to the technology in front of the classroom and infrastructure in between. Freedom of Information and Privacy Office is also part of my portfolio at the district itself too. We are a big school district. We have around 245,000 students coming into close to 582 schools on daily basis, or used to be daily basis. And being a large school district, we have close to 40,000 staff members who actually support, which includes 16,000 full-time teachers and then 8,000 occasional teachers as part of that mix itself too. And I'm sure today will be an opportunity to share some of the experience we have all gone through over the last 8 weeks. Look forward to a deeper discussion following our introductions. Back to you, Robert.
Thank you so much, Peter. Stephen Whiffen, that's the 43 Coquitlam. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Robert. My name is Stephen Whiffen. I'm Director of Instruction and CIO of Coquitlam School District. Coquitlam is part of Metro Vancouver. We're the third largest school district in British Columbia, and with about 32,000 students. So, not the size of Toronto, but have a bit of size to us nonetheless as a metro district. My role actually, as you would guess by my title, includes both an educational responsibility and a technical responsibility. On the CIO side, similar to Peter, I'm responsible for everything to do with technology, both operationally and around the educational technology that teachers use and students rely on. But on the Director of Instruction side, I have a staff development team who is focused on developing skill sets around the use of that technology and ensuring that effective pedagogy is in place around its application. So obviously, when we get into today's discussion, that side of things is going to be a huge part of what our focus has been, because we have this capacity that we've built around using technology, and that team has been absolutely central to putting teachers in a position to take this remote learning and run with it.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Over to you, Karen Yamada, the Chief Learning Officer for C21 Canada.
Thanks.
Say a few words.
Thanks so much, Robert, and welcome to everybody on board. I have been working for most of my leadership career in learning networks and learning communities, because certainly as the pandemic has demonstrated, it's those networks that help us get through in times of difficulty. But it's been proven now that where we have strong networks, we have the capacity to, we have the ability to build capacity in a hurry. And so the CEO Academy has been just that kind of network, and it has. We've invited CEOs of school districts, your bosses, so to speak, those who are in the sort of the lead chair, the lead learning chair, the lead leading chair in school districts, to come together as a network to share trials and tribulations as a way of building their own personal capacity. And that has proven over the past 5 years to have been a real godsend in terms of this pandemic. So to that end, we know that others in the senior management teams have asked and have looked for those kinds of opportunities to share some of the details and the grit associated with the work that they do. So with that, I commend you on this inaugural meeting of our CIO leaders, and look forward to having you aligned with us going forward. Thanks, Robert.
Thank you so much, Karen. And we also have David Roberts, our president of C21 Canada, on the line as well. If David, did you want to say a few words from New Brunswick there?
I don't think so, Robert. Just to say congratulations on the day. I'm really looking forward to the conversation and looking forward to some of the solutions people are coming up with going forward. So thanks for organizing this.
Excellent. Pleasure. Thank you. Just a quick couple of slides for me here. So I just want to share. So that's the agenda we have and the questions that we'll be offering each of our guests. And you will have an opportunity for a Q&A following about a 30-minute introduction. We launched the CIO K12 Leadership Alliance in the Yukon back in February, and Dr. Miro Chason is leading that along with Peter Singh and Stephen Whiffen. And one of the other elements, so we announced our Canadian Coalition for Learning at Home to support the crisis in Canada. It's about paying forward, and we had quite a number of strategic partners step up to provide resources, and estimating about $50 million in resources. And this is one screenshot of 3 that accompany this, and it continually grows in support. So it's never been more critical, given the further delays in school returning. As we know, Ontario announced yesterday, Minister Lecce announced yesterday that schools would not be reopening in June. I had the honor of interviewing the senior analyst, Dr. Tracy Burns from the OECD yesterday, that we'll be sharing later today on a global perspective. And we feel it's very important to provide a global perspective on how countries are pivoting and innovating during these challenging times. And earlier today, I had an opportunity to host Dr. Jordan Tinney from the Surrey School Division on how they're preparing. So with that, I'm looking forward to hearing from our colleagues from across Canada. And Mario, I'm going to pass the baton over to you. And I hope everyone's well. One of the, challenges is just, having the courage to stay home and stay safe and do all the right things. And Canada's been a leader in that regard. And I think we led the way across the country in how the provinces have adapted to remote learning in COVID learning time, I like to call it. This is an opportunity to get a perspective of how national or regional areas in Canada are adapting. And we pulled together some of the top leaders and districts, and we will continue this conversation as well as we progress through the rest of the school year. So with that, I'm going to pass the baton over to Dr. Mario Chiasson for his perspective and to share some of his slides. So I will stop sharing and over to you. Mario, you're muted at the moment.
Yeah, I just realized I was muted there. So
No worries.
So yeah, so going back there, yeah, it sure is a phenomenon worldwide. It's basically hit home in New Brunswick after March break. I call this the 3A phenomenon. Suddenly we had to adjust, this, and we had to adapt to it. And now it seems to be that we're adopting this phenomenon, working or learning from home. So, this from a family perspective, it was, as everybody would be, it would be very challenging, to continuing the learning. From a government perspective, we had initiative, to support the learning, from home and continuing the learning. But, there was no assessment per se, but guiding, assisting, all the terminologies for that. Definitely from a family perspective, there's some families has been, trying to adjust to that firmly, a mother or father being a teacher, suddenly it's just not the case. It would happen. So there's definitely some progression and adoption for that. Teacher's perspective as well, to be able to say suddenly teaching to school to teaching from home, is that in a normal classroom the teacher had student profile, right? Okay, they were assessing and support the learning. Now it's almost like residential profile, because every residential has got a different perspective. So, how they can personalize the teaching, personalize the learning there from distance. So, it's been a huge challenge there for the teachers, but school administrators as well, and district staff. So it's been a roller coaster. We adapting and adjusting on a daily basis. Of course, you've got the health and safety department, making assessment on a daily basis, and then try to provide some guideline on how we can move forward. Moving forward. So currently, we're just in the process of what September could look like, by creating scenarios, because we don't have no strict guideline yet. So the government, is working closely with us to to provide in that information as much as possible. So since then, we're leveraging digital technology, to do synchronous and asynchronous, learning. So we're leveraging on that, kind of create, those kind of three spaces, the physical space at home, the digital space online, and the hybrid space, which is basically the marriage of the. So we're kind of adjusting, as a province and organization, and how we're moving forward with this. Back to you, Robert.
All right, Mario, thank you so much. Over to you, Peter Singh.
Hey, Robert. Thank you, Mario, for sharing the perspective. On our side, it felt like we were on the top of a roller coaster during March break, and we didn't know what speed and what curves we're going to go through and hits we're going to get. So for us, very quickly, we wanted to figure out what are the needs out there in the system. So with that in mind, actually, we initiated a survey on two fronts. One was the survey that went to the parents, and the second one was actually that went to the teachers. We wanted to also know from the teachers what their needs are, so we can quickly pivot the back end to support that one. So from the parent side of things, we wanted to know if they have devices and internet at home. That's good. Just let us know they have it. And if they don't, what their needs could be. And for us, we were looking for, you just need a device from us? Do you actually need both device and internet from us? And the third option we actually give them, you have a device, but you're looking for an internet service. And we saw so far, we have seen close to 132,000 responses to that survey. And out of that one, quite a number of families already had a device. So actually ask for us is close to 64,000 families asking for things from us. So that's how our journey started. We need to quickly figure out where we're going to get those devices from. If we need to actually stock up and order some from our partners and / vendors. So that was a quick action we took. And we put together a strong team of trying to collect those devices at a school level and moving them over to our distribution center. And from there, we actually engaged a third-party courier to deliver them to the family homes. In Toronto, we could not have a curbside pickup at the schools because Toronto Health told us that nobody's allowed to leave their homes. So we actually really shift our pickup strategy to delivery strategy. So that work continues. It's been 7 weeks. We're at the very tail end of meeting all the needs so far. And when we're going to be done and finished with, it will be close to 60,000 devices shipped and handed to the families. I think the interesting number of that one is the families who said, we don't have internet at home. I think that's a very interesting number living in Toronto. To know that out of the overall volume of surveys we received, 2.9% of that survey told us they don't have an internet or device and internet is needed for those families. To me, our goal was to meet their needs first. So we actually made sure they are priority one, and along with the spec ed and the C claims families, and also grade 12, because this is your graduating year. We wanted to make sure these are the high categories as a priority for us to meet their needs. So that's how the work started on that front itself too. On the teacher side, when we actually reached out to the teachers, they really came back with quite a number of categories, but I'm going to share the top 5 categories they told us about they will like to get help on from a strategy perspective to support their practice. First one was, how do we provide content and curriculum resources to students? The second one, they wanted more help on assessment and evaluation in the digital learning environment. The third thing they asked for was sharing activities and assignment students online. And the fourth one was, how do I support students with IEP, individual education plan, in the digital learning environment? And the number 5th was, how do I connect with the students through video chat? The list continues, but I just wanted to highlight the top 5. At the same time, we also asked teachers what kind of tools you will learn to more about part of their remote learning itself. So they actually came back to us saying Brightspace learning platform was their number 1. They wanted to learn more about Google Classroom. These are 2 main platforms we've been using as part of our remote learning. And they were actually live and active running before even we started COVID-19 response. Google Meet, Brightspace, and Virtual Library was another one they wanted to actually learn more about it. So we actually put together more learning opportunities together for the teachers also. And I have, looking at the number over last 7 weeks, we have done over 305 learning sessions just for teachers, over 42 different subjects. And I've seen close to 21,000 attendees have taken those learning opportunities with them. We did not just stop at parents asking for device and teachers' needs. We actually went back to parents also after 4th week, asking them what's working and what's not working. And that's where we actually use the tools like Thought Exchange to get that parent voice into our discussions. And parents were very clear they were looking for more face-to-face time from the students themselves too. So those are some of the very quick, very highlights of what has happened since then. And I will actually now flip it over to Stephen for his part, and I'll come back and forth some of the challenges, issues, and other things we have seen so far.
Thank you so much for that, Peter. Much appreciated. Over to you, Stephen Whiffen.
Thank you. I'm going to attempt to screen share here if I can. There we go. Can everybody see that? Hopefully you can see my PowerPoint on the screen.
Yeah, we do.
Okay, so I just, you know, obviously Mario and Peter have identified a number of steps that probably many of us have been engaged in various ways. For example, I think one of the first things any district needed to do was go out and get a sense of where the gaps in technology were, because we identified very early on that technology was going to play a role in facilitating this remote learning thing that was unfolding. Now, from our perspective, it was really important to understand the context that we were coming from, because I think it really frames the decisions that are made along the way. And I suspect everybody out there that's listening right now has a similar reality. So for us, we had a significant focus on mobile computing already. We had about 85% of our technology fleet was already either laptops or iPads or some sort of mobile device. But a huge element of our pre-COVID-19 existence was that we had this broad bring your own device program in place already in grades 6 to 12. We're a middle school structure in our district. So elementary is K to 5 for us, middle school is 6 to 8. So starting in grade 6, we're already in a position where we're asking the vast majority of families to bring their own device. And we have a huge infrastructure in place already around that. We had deployed, on an annual basis, we deploy about 800 devices to support those bring your own device programs. And that's a very sustainable level for us. So when this situation hit, it meant we already had this large group of students that the infrastructure and support was already in place for them because this bring your own device system was in place. And we know bring your own device, there's a lot of discussion around, is it equitable, is it not equitable? Our perspective has always been very strong on the position that BYOD actually creates equity. By way of us as a district, we actually have a realistic ability to fill the technology gap if all the technology that's out there in the community available to families already is brought into the classroom. So from our perspective, when you know 80–90% of your students already have a device at home and they bring it into the classroom, we focus just on filling the gaps for the other 10 to 20%. That's a realistic achievement for us. And that's why bring your own device works at 6 to 12 for us. So as this situation unfolded, we were already in good shape for 6 to 12. So the focus shifted to K to 5, where we didn't have that type of programming in place already. So as a result in that, it created a smaller gap for us to fill. We already had significant immersion in place around Office 365. About 70% of our teachers were very active in Office 365 to support learning already. So again, that's a head start for us. But again, the bigger gap was at K to 5, where it was used at a much, much lower rate than it was at 6 to 12. We already had every educator right across the board with a modern laptop because we rotate teacher laptops every 4 years. And we also had this program in place, Pedagogical Helpdesk. Some of you may have heard of this approach we take before, but basically think of it as being like a technological help desk, except as run by teachers to support teachers. So this was a structure we already had in place. And the idea was for us to just ramp up the structure in this time of intense focus on using technology to support remote learning. And so we took steps to increase the amount of capacity that help desk had. And we made sure we had teacher resources at every single site in the district that were being part of this pedagogical help desk system, so that the structure didn't have to change for people, but the amount of capacity that it had did change fairly quickly. And with a bit of training put out to the field, we were able to have expertise supporting that structure in every school site. Finally, we have this culture of standardized platforms here that are really important. We have this focus. We're predominantly a Windows district. We have this focus on Office 365, which is really, really important to our success. We also use FreshGrade a ton at elementary and middle, so we knew it could play a role in us moving very quickly to remote learning. We have Discovery Learning widespread, particularly in the middle years. And most of you are probably aware, we have a centralized student information system in BC called MyEdBC. And that was going to play a role in the administration of all this, and that's used province-wide. So the result of that is within the first 10 days, actually, which I know seems amazing probably compared to some of the stories we've heard out there, Within the first 10 days, we were able to deploy a further almost 1,000 devices to ensure that every family had usable technology very, very quickly in this process. The goal was to have a maximum of 1 device shared between 2 students within a household. So as a first level priority, if we had a family where there was 2 children there, we made sure they had 1 device immediately. And then after that, we'd ramp up need beyond, we'd take a little more time to do anything beyond that. But the notion being that if you had 1 device for every 2 students in a household, the learning could continue fairly seamlessly for them, even if they had to schedule some access to those devices. That was less of a problem at 6 to 12, whereas I mentioned already that the one-to-one BYOD was predominantly in place. We then facilitated internet access for all. So after these first stages were done in the first 10 days, we'd already identified fewer than 50 families left that had exceptional needs. That usually related to lack of internet access. And through cooperation with TELUS and providing some subsidized internet, that was our preferred approach, because that subsidized internet will actually go on for a couple of years for them, and we get some long-term benefit from that. But in cases where them moving forward with internet wasn't possible, we deployed iPads with LTE connected capabilities, and that ensured that every family in our environment was connected. And we're very proud of the fact that in a district of our size, we were able to say within a couple weeks' time, we have everybody connected. And it really removes the argument for saying that technology can't be what we completely rely on. There's some people out there who their inherent go-to argument was always going to be, well, some students don't have, we should still stick with paper for some things. Our argument very early on is there's no need to stick with paper. We can connect with our families, we can communicate, we can have multiple connections a week, we can bring them into virtual class meetings. And all of that started to happen very, very quickly, because we were able to say, without exception, our families were connected. And it was a very, very key part of our plan. And then finally, with support, we put a centralized support structure in place where we had both horizontal and vertical supports with teams that were relevant for each of the grade groupings, because the issues are different at each of the grade groupings. But we also had common teams and supporting the instructional delivery model that we're using across the board. The instructional materials and curriculum team were coordinated to support each of these level teams, and a specific focus on vulnerable learners, because those vulnerable learners are the ones that really needed that exceptional support. And so a team was put in place to support that. So by using these structures, leveraging the positive elements that we already had in place, and quickly getting technology out to the field, it put us in a position to support teachers with adopting these remote technologies very quickly.
Thank you so much for that, Stephen. So,
See if I can.
Yeah, if you want to stop sharing.
Stop sharing. There we go. I think you got it back now. Good.
I'm back. Yeah, perfect. And we'll go back to my share. You seeing that okay?
Yes.
So I'm curious as to what, in the interest of time, I know I really packed this agenda. So what's working? How are the students and teachers responding? And what surprised you in the process of pivoting to remote learning? Because remote learning is not e-learning. It's not online learning. There's a real distinction that, in fact, Peter was one of your business teachers that I interviewed last week that talked about the reality of remote learning. You've got kids at home, you're trying to work, it's not a controlled learning environment. So that's the distinction I make in COVID learning time. So perhaps you can share, what's working, and perhaps what surprised you, Mario. How are the teachers and kids doing in all this? Were the kids consulted? And that was one of the questions, because really, who's the customer in the process, I guess, is the question as well.
Well, from New Brunswick perspective, we did as the others, we collect data and survey, try to have a basic understanding about addressing the two major issues. It's basically, accessibility to internet connection and accessibility to tools, and we'll have a deployment plan as well. In fact, our government, just announced, a couple of weeks ago that partnering, with the companies to address, the access communities, to the student that, that really struggling and all that. I guess that one of the successful stories that we have mainly is we have a sense of urgency of providing resources to the parent and students online, knowing the fact that there was no direct relationship between the student and the teacher. What we turned around is we created a website called Je m'éduque. And it's just like, a typical website that, that all the teachers across our province, just gathered a bunch of information that, that promote, just activities at home. So if a parent lacks of ideas on how that, they can, accompany their children or their child, of learning, they can go on this website, and download some not application, but just resources. So they keep the student active and alive about and engaged about learning. So that's, one of the things that, that we have a great story is within week, we have 12,000 hit, understanding that's not big, from a province of Ontario, for example. But for us, for example, in our district's composed of 37 schools, about 16,000 students, and 100 about a principal, it's a huge number that to make an impact. It's that we got resources, that actually being used at home. So now the following step is we ask the teachers to establish relationship with the families, and accompany them into their journey of this. So, and I think that we have a lot of great success in that, understanding that we got great challenge abroad of us in terms of that. So it's a work in progress for that. But those are basically most Stephen and Peter have mentioned is accessibilities and connectivity. There is we need to work with companies and provide solution, and therefore providing equity. All right. Okay. And what Stephen has brought up is a perfect proactive, district happen that, that addressing connectivity at home, is a powerful investment in terms of continuing the learning, because learning can be at home or at school. It doesn't matter. It's a learning opportunity. What's the most important thing is that we need to decentralize the pedagogical practices, which just mean relinquish control to the student learning so the student can be engaged in personalized learning and show evidence of their learning. And I think that's what we need to be inspired of continue this journey after the COVID effect.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. Over to you, Peter.
No, thank you, Mario. Thank you, Robert. What's been working? I think once we as an organization got pushed into this one, we wanted to make sure a few things are quickly in place. I think having a strong communication channels at all levels was a key to us. We had to communicate at a senior level, executive level, with the trustees, with the teachers, with our staff, our own departments. And my own team is around 340 folks. So we needed to establish channels. What's going to be the norm? Now, very quickly, we needed to establish all those things. We had to establish what is going to be our primary channel of communication. So our communication department was firing on all cylinders. So I saw that our communication was really, really working well. And when we talk about the success stories, I was talking to different folks who were at the front lines too, talking to the superintendents and the principals, also saying, what's been working for you? What hasn't worked for you? What I learned from those discussions was that if a school leadership has already had the entire team, all the teachers engaged in the practice, they had a excellent SIP plan in place, and it pivoted really well, connected to the technology plan effectively. They were actually flipped the switch and online stuff was working well. Stephen just shared that with us. If you have the norms established, where we saw those norms in some of the community and schools and learning networks, for them, this is just another channel and another way of working with the students. And the teachers who are already doing flipped classroom, they were strong in Brightspace, Google Classroom, G Suite. They didn't miss a beat. Right. And the teachers who actually were not part of that, and there was a little bit of weakness on the local leadership side too, that's where we saw a lot of issues. Then we also live in a city where we also work with our union partners. And to me, there's been a conflicting information shared with the teachers. Are they allowed to do video conferencing or not? Ministry on one hand said they will love to see more face-to-face time. On the flip side, Elementary Union has a different position. Our OCT bulletin that went out had a different communication. So teachers were confused. What should I do? What's the right thing to do? So I think, to me, lack of coherence at all these behind-the-scene organizations has also caused more challenges. And to me, another thing we saw was now parents are always an important part of the learning. Now they were actually a key player on the other side of this learning. So we needed to figure out how are we going to help parents to actually learn what environments we have at TDSB. Not all parents are fluent in how does the Chromebook work. So we need to quickly set up an online call-in chat environment, publish content that parents can quickly learn, offer learning opportunities through YouTube channel so parents can learn about G Suite, G Suite and Google Classroom and Brightspace and other things also. So those were the very quick things we needed to pivot and make sure they're in place. And looking at the data now, to me, I was surprised at how hungry the parents are to learn more about what TDSB does. So this will translate into a long-term our parent engagement strategy from here on. We need to actually shift our support model to how do we actually support families at home also. So to me, the data we have collected now, we needed to really, really leverage that data. And Stephen just shared also with how the discounted internet service can benefit a lot of families. How do we bring now telcos on table who can actually provide that service? So we're not solving the problem for 3 months or 12 weeks. This should be done for all coming years for those families who really need help from us. The data tells us that story. Now, the City of Toronto is also looking at that data saying, how can we actually close the gaps on those communities and connect them online all the time? So to me, yes, we struggled, but we had a lot of successes too. But now I see a lot of opportunities ahead of us also to close these gaps. We always talk about digital divide, but now you have real data in front of you, real house addresses, numbers to see what challenge is and how we can actually help our organization to close those gaps. Back to you, Robert.
Thank you so much for that insight, Peter. Over to you, Stephen Whiffen.
Yeah, I just think Peter's so right about the opportunity that exists in this tremendous challenge. We can't miss the opportunity and having a chance to know more, not guess more, not base it on gut, not base it on what we think our families and kids are, but base it on information we have now that we've never had before, and capture this momentum that exists around the role that technology can play in transforming educational practice. So to that end, I wanted to just actually share a bit of data with you, if that's okay.
Sure.
You can share. Oh, you can let me screen share again there.
Okay, I'll just stop sharing. Back
Perfect.
to you.
And there we go. I think everybody can see that now. So what this is actually a graph that shows our Office 365 activity. And this particular one I chose because it includes equal amounts of spring break. Everybody I'm sure can see where spring break is on the chart.
Right.
We have 2 weeks spring break in BC. So you see the 2 weeks of downtime there. You see the pre-spring break levels and you see the post-spring break levels. Now, the pre-spring break, interestingly, on any given day, we had somewhere around 18,000 people. These are single day points. So on any given day, 17 or 18,000 people were using Office 365 in our district. Overall, our usage rate was running around 70%. Doesn't mean you get 70% in one day. We're more like about 50% in one day, in any given day. And you see coming out of spring break, that's when the COVID response started. You talk about ramp up. Well, you can actually see the ramp coming up out of the post-spring break as things ramp up. But the most interesting part here, which I don't know, may be a little hard for you to see, but if you look at the orange, The orange is Microsoft Teams, which is a real key piece to
Wow.
our remote learning. Prior to spring break, Teams is about 40% of the overall Office 365 activity level. After spring break, it's 95%. So we
Incredible.
successfully, in an extremely short period of time, moved teachers to, we had about 6,000 active teams. It was very well used at secondary. But after spring break, as COVID response kicked in, it was used by everybody. And as you see, we're up close to 30,000 people connecting on any one day in our district. So we're really, really pleased with that response. You want to look a little more closely at the numbers. This is an interesting one because pre-spring break, it appears to be flatlined. In actuality, we have about 6,000 communication events a day prior to spring break, but it exploded so much after spring break that it makes everything that happened before that look completely and utterly flatlined and insignificant, which is amazing to me. So we're at the point now where on any given day, we're around 150 to 155,000 communication events happening this is specifically in Microsoft Teams. So this is just one tool that we're using. So about 155,000 communication events on every single day in Microsoft Teams. And just breaking that down a little bit farther, we can get into more and more detail around what the nature of the events are, how many of them are posts, how many of them are virtual like interactions like we're having right now. And we're seeing how much of that activity is occurring, and all of those things have risen substantially post-COVID. And as a result of that, there's a huge amount of learning happening in our community, in our teacher community, and our student community. So as a result, we feel we're well positioned to continue this momentum after things settle back in and become normalized again.
Thank you so much for that fascinating data, Stephen. And I'll just grab that back from you. And the next question, I'm really fascinated by the whole notion around, innovators' mindset, growth mindset, if you will, preparing for back to school, fast forwarding back to school. And what do you anticipate? Are we going to go back to the way it was, or are we going to take the best of the best and what was working and more of a hybrid model? Well, if you crystal ball gaze a little bit and based on the insight you have, what's back to school going to look like in September for you, Dr. Mario Chiasson?
Yeah, what I'll do at the moment, I'll screen share one slide to share with you our reflection where we're at, and it's totally in line. I know what Peter and Steve are saying now is anticipating, who's going to be like, we're all moving to the schools, what it could look like, right? Okay, the conversation is based on the health regulation is 1 person by 2 meters radius and all that. But truth to be told, when we're looking at that, is what's the theory behind that about the possibilities around it. So I'll share the screen, and we're talking about space here, right? Okay, so every learning opportunities need a space. This doesn't matter if it's a physical space or virtual space or hybrid space. We need to understand about the specific location within those spaces. So when we're talking about, the physical space, we used to have the public space where you got school libraries, museum, and internship. You have an opportunity of learning. And now we're living into a private space that students doing and teachers doing their teaching and learning in bedroom, living room, basement, etc. at the home location. So that's kind of the current status there. And we're leveraging the digital technologies in kind of a 2D format. It's basically as a communication tool and collaboration tool, like Stephen and Peter are well clarified and supported by data. There's also the three-dimensional aspect of it about the virtual classroom, the virtual lab, and virtual schools per se, and how it could look like, in this space. So we're still in reflection about what's September is going to look like, based on the policies that have established here in our province. But we're looking about, seeing most predominantly a hybrid system which is basically could be one solution that one day I'm going to have, if let's say I got 20 students in my class, and they say, well, the first 10 will be physical and the other 10 will be virtual, like, during the same time. And the next day it will be a rotation between the student to provide social dynamic and interaction into this. So that's one medium. The other medium will be a rotation business between day per day, but the curriculum will be, it's the same as the 3 times. So we're still, reflecting about all those possibilities, but we're definitely looking forward for C12 model, and what kind of we can leverage, bring your own device that we already have implemented about a few years ago. But our challenge is probably going to be like the M5 population. How we're going to make sure that they have quality service there at school, and how that could look like, with the space available there, in our districts. But in a nutshell, that's what the learning could look like in those 3-dimensional, the physical, the hybrid, but also the digital, and how that we can create, an experience that the student are in charge of their learning, and ability to create opportunities to learning by conceptualizing and innovating. We want them to be validating their working by researching, consulting members of the community, and also experimenting by prototyping. But most important, they reflect on their learning. We want them to come up with a product. We want them to publish their stories. At the same time, do a lot of presentation, which are the skills, that our industry is requiring. So we're talking about a teacher's role, assisting and guiding and coordinating the learning from home or from schools. Because if we have a sudden pandemic, in October, we want the methodologies and the strategies implemented there, still continuing offsite. And when I say offsite, it's basically at home. So the learning is going to be navigating from, synchronous to asynchronous, and also providing a learning opportunities for the students, for the teachers, to always navigate to, I'm going to learn professionally, and I'm going to integrate pedagogically. Like Steve and Peter were saying, is always providing an ongoing professional learning opportunities so that the teacher can grow, right? Okay, and provide another medium of pedagogical practices there. But in a nutshell, that's what where we're at, and we're still we're scratching our head to say, like, what could be the game plan as we move forward, and we're receiving more data from the province as we move.
Thank you so much for that. You are no doubt inspiring your teachers with your passion, Mario, for transformation and innovation.
Okay, I'll stop sharing. Have you stopped the sharing? Yeah. Okay.
And over to you, Peter.
So thank you, Mario, and thank you, Robert. For us, we will be looking towards the ministry to actually provide guidance. And I think before June, we're going to actually hear back from it. So a lot of discussions have started behind the scenes right now. And there are multiple frameworks available. I know on the business side, even the KPMG actually published Back to Workplace framework, which anyone can go to kpmg.ca and download that framework. We on TDSP side is exploring how we will be actually slowly phasing everything back. 40,000 staff members is not a small organization. And how are we going to get the whole ecosystem ready? So we know right now our caretaking staff is back in the schools, trying to get the schools in a better shape now, so we can actually start dealing with some of the break and fixes we need to execute. They've been on hold for the last 2 months or so. So some of that work's already started. Now we also need to come up with shared spaces. We are in a big administrative buildings. Each building is close to 600 people. And some of those buildings are also shared with the City of Toronto. How are we going to facilitate back to workplace? And those norms need to be established. So guidelines needs to be provided. And PPE has to be in place. Well, whatever Toronto Health will be recommending, we have to follow all those things. So a lot of questions at this stage, very few answers. But I like the model Dr. Mario shared with us, that we needed to be in all 3 spaces. From here on in September, we're not going to be in a single space anymore. And I think we needed to be exploring all options. And to me, this remote learning will slowly translate into more online and e-learning. So more investments will be made in that front in Ontario especially. And we needed to see who will be coming into the school. Some of the parents might decide, depending on what their family situation is, who's not well in the home, they might decide that kids are not going to go to the school. So homeschooling might actually go up. Because parents have that option. So we need to shift and pivot. Part of COVID-19 response, we know we actually mailed written or printed material to 11,000 families because we didn't want to wait for them to receive a device. We wanted to make sure once a teacher tells us that this child needs it, we were actually able to mail that one. So the number was around 11,000 or so printed material too. So you don't stop at exploring all these options. How can we actually engage learners? And the same logic will come into September. But on top of that one, there's so many things need to be in place. Our playgrounds are shared with public parks. So we need to work with the City of Toronto to make sure those spaces are clean and they're well maintained and the proper signage is in place, and who's going to be looking after those spaces. So a lot of logistical things need to be in place before we invite kids back to September. I honestly, my personal view is that it's no more going to be a normal school opening from here on. We will be in some sort of a hybrid mode. What would that look like exactly? Time will tell. But I think the guidance from the ministry in June will help us to close those gaps. But our discussions behind the scene right now, we have a lot more questions, less answers. We're just going through different scenarios and also studying other jurisdictions, what has happened in Denmark, even something has in BC, some private schools have opened up. And today I saw the news in South Korea. They were actually showing the kids coming back to school, and there was a line of adults checking the temperature for all the kids. How do you manage with 250,000 kids coming in? Right? How do you scale all that? So that's why I keep saying that a lot more questions than answers at this point. Back to you, Robin.
Thank you so much, Peter, for that insight, and kudos to you for pivoting and being so proactive with a school district of your magnitude, and that hybrid learning style and adapting to the needs of families is really heartwarming. Over to you, Stephen Whiffen.
Yeah, I think, Peter's exactly right. A huge part of the exercise here is making sense of a context that we never needed to make sense of before, ultimately, is what it comes down to. And it creates not only this new reality, but this turn-on process that we haven't experienced in the past. But I think, Mario's fantastic graphic on what this hybrid learning looks like and all the dynamics of this, and putting it in the paradigm of learning spaces is actually really, really important. We're looking at the move into the physical classroom as being kind of represented by a dial. We don't know what's going to happen next, so you need to be able to either dial it up or dial it back. And I think we're probably a bit naive if we don't think there's going to have to be a bit of movement back and forth over the next several months. We know, in our context, we know pretty much what's happening between now and the end of June. But I think when we look ahead to the fall, to the end of the calendar year, it's very realistic. We have this scenario where we're going to pull kids much more into the classroom, but then we may need to have the ability to pull out of the classroom a little bit to some degree to respond to whatever emerging situations are happening. We're only going to be positioned to do that if teachers are starting to make sense of how they can keep a consistency in the instructional experience, regardless of how much dialing up and dialing back happens, so that the focus can be on the quality of the learning, and we ensure that kids aren't losing more than a few weeks of successful focused learning experiences. And I think we have the ability to do that now in a way that probably we didn't if we look back 2 months ago, where teachers didn't have their heads wrapped around the notion of their remote learning actually being able to mix together with the physical learning in some way. But I think one of the great things we're going to experience out of June here is that whole mixing of the two is going to be front and center as a bit of a month-long experiment and learning experience, if you will. And out of that, I think we will be well prepared to help teachers make sense of, in September, how some element of this remote learning should be maintained. Even if all the kids are back in school when September comes around, we don't know what's going to happen the next week or the next day. And therefore, if we're not keeping some of that remote learning active at the periphery, we have a risk that we can't adjust the dial in the way that we may be required to do. So we're gonna focus on making sure that remote learning does still stay at the periphery for all of the educational experiences we provide in the fall, so that we have that ability to fall back on that in an appropriate way at any time.
Thanks so much for that, Stephen Whiffen. So let's wrap up with the final question on your advice to school districts in preparation for the future, and also for edtech companies, and what advice you might offer them, because there are a lot of startups, and I've been approached on, asking me, should we be contacting schools now? What should we be doing? My suggestion has been, be part of the coalition of resources, pay forward if you can, make your resources available, and they will approach you if they're in need of your resources. One of the interesting evolutions that we've seen, and I was speaking with one of the former district directors in York Region School Board, Dr. Bill Hogarth, around disaster management planning, and how do you prepare to future-proof your district in the school? Cities do this. My wife's city clerk in our city, and they have a disaster management plan. But anticipating the unexpected is a great challenge, given the magnitude and school districts being the centerpiece, as it's been described, of a community. How do we prepare for this in the future, and what advice do you have to edtech companies? Mario.
It's a very powerful question, and there's a lot of question. It's like we said, we got a lot of question, but basically we don't have a lot of answers to it. And like both, Stephen was saying, it's a wonderful opportunity to innovate and rethink. One of the areas that we need to have to figure out is that we had a vision before COVID. Now we have to craft a new vision for after COVID. And we got amazing opportunities to leverage that and craft a new vision. The more I think about that, I think that the one area we need to look for is having data. I don't think we have enough data, per se, to really help us to make a decision. But the thing that we need to look to it is by leveraging the communities. Is that over the last 100 years we have focused, really on the digital model, and we need to figure out a different way that the community is a school. Right? If the community is a school, the school is becoming the garage of the community, where every student can innovate, can collaborate, can bring members of the communities and share that. And this is where that you can leverage business partnership. And at the same time, the business partnership can leverage the future of our employees because they have established relationship with that. It may be too much out there in terms that of the reality, but we really have to think about that. The education system right now, they can't do this alone anymore. They definitely need every member of the organization. It could be entrepreneur, it could be small businesses, it could be the public system, it could be the manufacturing or the service industry. I think that we really have to put all our heads together and figure out the path of our new future generation. And I do believe that it's a wonderful opportunity to leverage edtech companies, who's got those vision already embedded into their DNA, and for us tap, and work collaboratively, for lack of a better term, to establish that. But we got an enormous opportunity, but an enormous challenge.
Thank you so much for that, Mario. Over to you, Peter Singh.
A couple of things, Robert. One thing I wanted to encourage organization is to dust off their enterprise risk management And you touched on disaster recovery, which is important part too. And I will say business continuity actually needs to be looked at it very seriously, not just on a business side of the organization, also on the academic and the classroom side of things too. We needed to continue to invest more in portable mobile technology platforms. We need to shift from on-premise to the cloud, so that availability of resources is there all time, anytime, from anywhere. So if the organization hasn't done that one, they needed to quickly pivot in that direction. So that will actually help some of the ed tech companies who are actually playing in that space and moving on-premise workloads into the cloud itself too, providing more and more tools online. And so the classroom side can leverage that too. But I think it's time for organization to really pay attention and invest in business continuity. And to me, some of the organizations have been caught short on that front. They have struggled during this time. So this is we are blessed that we live in a country like Canada, and looking around the globe and listening to the news from other countries across the continents, some of the other jurisdictions are really struggling with the basics on that front. For us to have that base infrastructure in place has given us a little bit of a lead to really meet the needs of our learners out there in the system itself too. So one message I will give back to the other organization is make sure you're seriously looking at enterprise risk management, and especially around business continuity. Back to you, Robert.
Thank you so much, Peter. Excellent points. Stephen Whiffen.
Yeah, I think I think one of the challenges that exist for us as organizations that are moving forward, and in turn for ed tech companies out there that are innovating, is we need visionaries, and we need visionary innovative products coming to market and bringing us new opportunities and new ways of doing things. But at the same time, ed tech has always been, in all honesty, for my entire 22 years in education, it's always been hampered a little bit by the rate of change that the industry expects of schools, which are in many ways not realistic. And I actually believe in our district we've been more successful at creating quick shifts in behavior and practice by focusing intensely on key tools that we put in place, and putting all of our support around professional development and the technology tools that we need around those handful of tools. That's led to us getting better adoption rates overall for those tools, which in turn leads to educational practice change. So there's this dichotomy there, in that we want to see innovation, we want to see new visionary ideas come out and be able to adopt those. But at the same time, we don't want to be jumping around from one tool to another, or otherwise becoming too diversified in what it is we expect to support, or change is not going to happen. And so those two pieces need to balance each other off a little bit. There's no question, I think all of us have been completely and utterly inundated with organizations out there who have opportunities to help us in various ways, and many do have things that are very valuable to offer. The question is, what are the right opportunities for us to grab onto and say, this is the one that works for our context, given the frame that we're working from, given the tools we're already working with, which are the pieces that are the right ones for us to adopt right now that allow us to continue to move on that steady, consistent change approach, as opposed to coming in and saying, well, now we should do something totally different. Because it's that jumping around from doing one thing to another that's totally different that actually never leads to the change happening. So it's one of the places where I think there needs to be more industry cooperation than we've seen largely over the last 20 years. And that's hard in a competitive environment where everybody is obviously competing with each other. But the more that ed tech can come together around common standards and common approaches to doing things, while at the same time allowing for that visionary development to occur, then I think we better position ourselves as an educational system to adopt things that lead to meaningful change.
Thank you so much for that perspective, Stephen. I'll kick off the first question. It just begs the concern around privacy and security as we pivot to this hybrid learning. How are you grappling with that? And will you be looking to solutions around, filling that that potential void? Mario, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's a very serious question, in all honesty, because what we try to utilize, is standardized platform that the province have, purchased, like Steve was saying, their Office 365 platform, and we do as a province as well. And sometime, through the great innovation of teachers, some teachers like to utilize other type of platform. And us as an organization, we need to provide, the digital citizenship protocol that we're promoting platform that the province is supporting. And when the province is supporting, the data is secured. So it's one of the things that, communication is one of the aspects like this, but also providing a good action plan that, let's say that we're utilizing Team or Microsoft OneNote, right? It's our platform that we have embraced as an organization, that we make sure that we're providing the proper action plan, the proper training, so they can have an impact administratively and also pedagogically. And that's the thing that that we're constantly promoting as be a proactive to make sure that we're teaching our students, teaching our teachers, teaching our whole members of our organization that data security and personal information is very important. So we constantly doing some activity to make sure that this has been at least aware of that. But on the other side, we're using social media, a lot of, Facebook site, for example, or Twitter feed, et cetera. So we'll try to create a balance of that. It's not an easy challenge. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Peter, how are you grappling with the safety and security of your teachers and students?
I think it's not something new to us. I believe that there is no magic fix for it. It's an ongoing learning that needs to happen for all of us, including teachers and students. So I think digital citizenship, online safety, and more awareness of privacy and security concerns. In remote learning, I know some of the apps around video conferencing got a high profile around weakness in their privacy. So people jumped on it, and the vendor also went back and started to fix some of the things they thought were holes in their platform. So I've seen those things go back and forth, but privacy and security should never take a back seat. Doesn't matter you're in remote learning or not. It has to be at the forefront. And more we continuously help our folks to learn about it. More awareness is important. Continuously communicate about the standard platforms you have it. And what Stephen's done with his district is really impressive, that they selected a few important tools and they stayed with them. And you can see that investment has paid off. And to me, and with that, the security and privacy concerns get dealt with it. But to me, they should never take a back seat. I will continue to encourage the teachers that use the board-approved tools. Do not just go out there and find another nice looking shiny toy and you jump on it, and then the privacy leak happens. So to me, it's very, very important for teachers and staff to follow the board issues platforms, stay with them, and the guidelines we have in place, they need to be followed. End of the day, will there be challenges? Yes, there will be. There some people who will always complain about the standard tools we have it. Answer is yes. But we need to continue to chip at it and make sure they're aware of it. So running a regular awareness campaign is a key in my mind to make sure people know where the gaps are.
Excellent advice. Thank you so much, Peter. Over to you, Stephen.
Yeah, I mean, I just picking up right on what Peter said. It's really a process of policy, practice, and education, right? That's what it comes down to. We have a thoughtful, well-designed policy in place. We put good technical practices around how the security policy in particular is implemented in terms of technical design. But as far as your weakest point in the chain, it always comes back to the users. and in particular teachers, because they control so much of what happens in the day-to-day experience in our organization. We have to invest in education of our teachers. If we fail to do that, the most important user group that is ultimately going to keep our students and their information safe are not prepared to do that. And there's no technical solution that is ultimately going to overcome that lack of education. Education has to be part of the mix. You throw teacher autonomy into that, and we have language that we use around teacher autonomy. I like to say there's no such thing as teacher autonomy, there's professional autonomy. And it's a key distinction. Teachers do have autonomy to make professional decisions, and our policy actually gives them that ability to do that. But making your own professional decisions comes with explicit professional responsibilities. If you're doing something that is not legally compliant in terms of how student data is stored, you need to be held professionally accountable for that if things go wrong. And we're really clear in our education process with our teachers that that's the case. And if you then feel as a professional you're qualified to make good decisions around how you keep student data safe, we're going to allow you to make some decisions around that. And hopefully you make good decisions. And if you don't, there comes some accountability with it. So that's the way we frame professional autonomy around decisions our teachers are making with technology tools. That is an important distinction to make, because those teachers that want to have the flexibility to go out and adopt some of these new pieces and run with them and become those exemplars that all of us have in our district around new innovative things, they feel empowered to do it, but they do it in a more collaborative way than if we just leave it Wild West, because they'll reach out and they'll ask, hey, what do you think of this? I think it's exciting. I just want to know that you think it's safe. I've looked it over. It's hosted in Canada. We have some stricter rules in BC than some provinces do. And they'll bring that back and we'll look it over, and they'll get a thumbs up, and then we let that innovation happen. So I don't want to leave everybody with the impression that we do anything that stifles innovation. But I actually argue that good policy can encourage innovation because people feel safe then around the decisions they're making. But the things that aren't safe, they explicitly avoid. We're a little slow we're on Zoom here right now. We're a little slow to adopt it because the free Zoom accounts, they come with a lot of problems. And we said, you know what, you can't just move forward with this and putting students in it. And so we did a lot of work before Zoom was in a position to be used at an enterprise level in our district. And we didn't need it right away because we, of course, were Teams focused. But we had a clear focus on making sure our data is safe, because our community needs to be confident that if the education process is changing, what we're expecting students to do is driven by technology. Our public has to be confident that what we're doing with the kids is safe. And the moment we fail to do that, we potentially compromise the whole thing.
With that, Stephen, thank you for that brilliant perspective. As from Peter and Mario today, you get a virtual round of applause here from around the virtual table. Want to be mindful of your time. I know you have extremely busy schedules. Thank you for your thought leadership, your courageous leadership during this challenging time. We will look at a future webinar as well. This will be recorded and shared on our social media. I want to thank C21 Canada Canadians for 21st Century Learning and Innovation as a partner in making this possible today. My name is Robert Martelacci. Until next time, keep the learning curve steep. Okay, that's a wrap on the recording. Gentlemen, I will share that out with you. And
well done, guys.
Thank you to everyone who joined us today. And we will be in touch again.
Nicely done.
Exceptional. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mario. Bye,
Thank
Stephen.
you, Peter. See
Bye,
you,
Robert.
Stephen. Bye,
Thanks,
Robert.
guys. Great conversation. Really appreciate everyone
Cheers,
joining.
guys.
Cheers.
Yeah,
Thanks,
I'm here.
everybody.
Same here. Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you.
Stay safe, everyone.